Hello, everyone. Glad to see everyone got here okay. My name is Charles Wu. I'm a first-year MBA student at MIT Sloan, and I'm honored to introduce you to the Road to the Championship Playoff Analytics panel. I'm honored to introduce our guest today. From left to right, we have Todd Durbin, Executive Vice President of Player Relations and Competition at Major League Soccer, Oliver Luck, Executive Vice President of Regulatory Affairs at the NCAA, Neil Payne, Senior Sports Writer at 538.com, Chris Marinac, Senior Vice President of League Economics and Strategy at Major League Baseball, and Eric Nyquist, Senior Vice President of Strategic Development at NASCAR. And then finally, our panel will be moderated by Mark Bechtel, editor at Sports Illustrated. So our panel is going to run for 45 minutes, and we'll leave 15 minutes at the end for questions. If you want to ask a question, use our Twitter hashtag #PlayoffAnalytics. That's #PlayoffAnalytics. The questions of top mentions will be forwarded to Mark. And with that, I'll just turn it over to you, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you. So last year, Sports Illustrated picked the Indians to win the World Series. And if you see in my bio, it says that I'm a long-suffering Cleveland sports fan, as if there's any other kind of Cleveland sports fan. But so most people who know me know that I'm a fan of the Indians, and so they kind of put two and two together and said, oh, that's a dumb pick. It must have been Bechtel's idea. And it was. But in my defense, I never said, look, I think the Indians are the best team in baseball. We should pick them to win the World Series. The feeling was they fit the profile for a team that could win the World Series. And if you look back, this is starting with last year and going back, with this is just winning percentage out of the 30 major league teams. The two teams that played in the World Series. Last year was 4 versus 7. Year before, 8 beat 7. 2013 is the real outlier. The Red Sox beat the Cardinals. That was 1 versus 2. Before that, 4-11, 8 over 3, 5 over 8, 1 over 5, 5 over 3, 1 over 6, 13 over 4, which was 2006 Cardinals-Tigers. So the idea was, we don't want to pick the team that we think is the best team in baseball because they're probably not going to win the World Series, which raises some interesting questions. And the most obvious one is that fair? Is that the best way to have a playoff system if the team that is on paper the best team so rarely wins? So that's really what we're here to talk about today. And I think the best place to start, it might seem obvious, but if we're going to talk about the best way to pick a champion, is what is a champion? What does it mean to be a champion? What should your sport be looking for in crowning? And I think we'll just start down at the end and just run through and just very briefly, what's a champion in MLS? Who should be crowned?
Well, for us, it's our champions who wins MLS Cup. And I think your comment is interesting. You start at the beginning and say, who is the best team on paper, and is the best team on paper necessarily the one that ends up winning the championship? The way I think about it is maybe they weren't the best team on paper. And the whole reason why you go through the course of the season and the reason why you go through the playoffs is to try to crown a champion. And we, I'm sure, like a lot of other sports organizations, are constantly debating, is this the best format? Is this the best way to decide, who the best team is? But I think, at least from our standpoint, you start at the beginning of the year and you set out what the competition is. This is what you have to do to win. This is what you have to do to be the champion. And then the teams are all competing within that framework that they've all agreed upon at the outset as to who the champion's going to be. So in some ways, the champion is the champion. I mean, that's what the goal of the season is to win MLS Cup.
Oliver?
In our case, in college athletics, of course, there's the NCAA tournament and all the sports that we sponsor, and winning that championship obviously is sort of self-explanatory in terms of the title, but I'd also just throw in, so folks can keep it in mind, we also crown individual champions in a number of the individual sports, which is a little bit of a different angle than I think all of our professional sport franchises that exist. So really, in our case, it's getting into the NCAA tournament, whatever the sport is. Very often there's human discretion that's applied to choosing the participants in the NCAA tournament, again, dependent upon the sport, and that leads obviously to the championship game and championship experience.
Neil, we're going to skip you for now.
Yeah, I got to agree that the champion is, by definition, the team that has kind of outcompeted the other teams according to the set of rules that everybody has in common and they've all agreed on at the beginning of the season. Now, those rules are also by definition varying degrees of arbitrary, and they've been decided by the league, and that's where we kind of get into the whole point of what we're talking about today is, can the league sort of tweak things to make the champion equal that best team on paper? And is that actually even a good thing? And that's kind of an open question.
Yeah, and Chris, I didn't mean to pick on baseball when I ran through it. You could really go through any sport and have that. But what do you think? What is your feeling on seeing a team with 87 wins winning the World Series? Is that good, bad?
Oh, I think a good place to start is the fact that you listed out the rank of each team each year. And one of the interesting points that we've come across in some of our work is that we think it probably takes between 1,000 and 5,000 games a year to actually be confident that you would have the team with the most wins, confident that you have the best team actually win the most games, because there is so much luck and randomness involved. So if you start from the position that it's physically impossible to design a season where the best team has the most wins because of all the other factors that are involved, it then moves you to a point where you say, okay, how am I going to balance a regular season where my goal of a regular season is to get the handful of teams that are in that equation, the handful of teams that are the best teams. Maybe we don't know who is the actual best, but hey, if you're in this group, you're probably one of the better teams. And then you take it to head-to-head. So I think there's just a general acceptance that if you compete against somebody head-to-head, you know that team is better. And I think fans and I think our clubs and people in general will accept that if you make it through a tournament, much like the NCAA basketball tournament, if you're left standing at the end, you fought that gauntlet and you were successful, you're the champion.
Eric, I saved you for last on purpose because NASCAR is just so different than all the other sports. What goes into, well, first I guess we should just make sure everybody knows how things used to be. You used to, if you just sort of explain the point system as it was and what it's evolved to with the chase.
Yeah, you bet. And I think at large as we talk about this, it's hard to talk about this without the context of the mass commercialization of sport over the last several decades and how that's morphed the expectation of fans around what exactly is a championship. And it's working to that crescendo moment where a team that is playing at its very best at the end of the season is who the fans, the sport, comes to expect to be the champion that is crowned. With NASCAR, as it's evolved, we had for years and years a points structure. So basically your championship was decided based on how you did over the course of the entire season. And in terms of the analytics and the data, it was fairly straightforward. You would have your finishes over the course of the season, and you'd add that up to a point, and whoever accumulated the most points would be the champion. Well, as sports evolved, the expectations, the commercialization of the game, those crescendo moments that other sports had a bit more organically, if you will, we found that for our sport, we would, as many times as not, we'd get towards the end of the season and you'd have a championship was largely already in place, or maybe you'd have a couple of teams moving. So, and then finally, the other part, and it plays into all of sport, is that balance between the regular season and a championship. We had created some perverse incentives, where you'd have cars that are racing for points and where they want to settle in the field, and that would take away from the inherent competition that's going to drive that interest, that passion. I mean, the reason we're all here today is how people feel about sport and what it brings out in them. So for us, what we had to do is we've evolved our sport and our championship over time, and that when you have something that for years has been grounded in a points-based system, to move towards the chase is what we did a dozen plus years back, and now we've most recently moved to an elimination type format to crown our champion. We think it's been great for our sport, but it's been a major change.
Yeah, and what's interesting to me about the point system and the way it was is that you could have a driver who won 8 races and had a couple crashes be behind the standings to a guy who won 1 race and constantly finished in the top 5. So it created this incentive for you to go out and not necessarily win. And NASCAR drivers, that just doesn't really register with them. When they go out, they're looking to do one thing. It's checkers or wreckers, is what they say.
That's right, that's right.
So with our format, you know, we change it. We put a real emphasis on winning. I mean, that's what the fans want to see. That's where you get those great, special, memorable moments that people cling to, why they're a part and why they want to engage whatever form of sport they love. And so for us, we put greater appreciation on the win. Obviously, you want to race well throughout the season, and our playoff format rewards that as well, being consistently a top performer. But we've really accentuated the win with our format.
So obviously, you know, the playoffs are the big moment, the end, the crescendo moment, as you called it. But you know, we have regular seasons in every sport. So I'll just throw this out to the panel. I mean, to what extent do we need to reward regular season excellence when setting up a playoff system, and how do you do that?
Well, I think it's. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, that's a great philosophical question because, like Chris said, if we're trying to determine the best team, in a lot of cases with most of the sports that we're talking about, you would need astronomical numbers of games to actually figure out who the true best team is. And so then it becomes a question of like, well, if we have to put that aside as a goal and kind of move on to something else, then is it about maximizing excitement? Is it about, you know, trying to figure out who is the best team playing at the end of the year, and how do you even kind of quantify that?
Yeah, one of the things that we've done is in the design of the baseball schedule, it's a heavy division format. So you play a lot of games against the teams in your division. So there's a theory that, you know, if you win your division, you get that reward. And with our most recent playoff format, with the one-game wild card, you know, knockout, there's actually a big incentive to win your division and to be the winner of all that head-to-head competition, because you get to advance past that wild card round where you got, you know, 50-50 shot of advancing. So from our standpoint, we like to provide an incentive to the regular season. It's probably because, you know, we have so many games, and so we want to encourage fans to watch and support those games. We put a lot of value on the regular season, probably more so than some of the other sports.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, part of the challenge that you have, at least with American sports, is you get to the end of the season, you actually don't know who the best team is because no one plays a balanced schedule, and so you're sort of sitting there at the end of the year wondering, you know, you can point to the records, but if you haven't played the same opponents the same number of times, I don't think anybody can sit at the end of the season and credibly say we're the best team. So then I think the question becomes, in that context, how do you find the best team? How do you crown the champion? And I think, I know at least with the way we do it in Major League Soccer, and I think it's somewhat consistent with the other sports, is that's where you try to find the balance. So what you try to do is give some competitive edge to those teams that performed well during the season. Either they get a bye or they get home field advantage, to reward them for what they did and to make sure that everybody understands the regular season really matters. But at the end of the day, without some structure, in the absence of a balanced schedule, I don't know how you would determine who the best team is.
Baseball, and how do you guys, you know, one of the ways you could reward a team is obviously in the playoffs, somebody's going to have an advantage because they're going to have home field. How much do you guys look at, say, scheduling? I mean, you could have the first round be 2-2-1. It could be 2-3. Do you do a lot of sort of looking back and kind of analyzing how those various scenarios would play out when you're deciding what to do going forward?
Yeah, so the tough thing about baseball is that there's a rhythm to the season. And if you start getting too carried away with all these different formats, then teams start to be on a substantial amount of rest, and then it's actually a disadvantage. So if you have too extensive of a bye, where if you had an extensive first round and the best team got to sit for 10 days, that would be viewed actually as a negative to that team. And so it's a mix. We do look at that a lot. But we look at a lot of it from the scheduling format of when we can play the games, and that's why we end up having a lot of days where we have 4 playoff games on one day, including a noon game on a Tuesday. Ask what league would want to schedule a championship postseason game at noon on a Tuesday. Who's going to watch that, right? But we have to do that because there's a competitive advantage element to keeping your rhythm throughout the postseason, to give that team that was the most successful team, that did have that rhythm going into the postseason, they're able to continue that and make it to the World Series.
Oliver, the major college sports, used to be very beholden to the human element. You had, the bowl committees, you had selection committees, and now this is really one of the sports or areas where analytics has really come into play, and you guys could almost put the whole thing on autopilot if you wanted to. So, 2 questions. The first is, how do you balance the need to be objective and the desire to give yourself a certain amount of subjectivity when you're constructing a playoff system? And then second, if you could just talk a little bit about what tools you feel are the most important when you're trying to construct a playoff that you think is the fairest.
So if we talk about college football, which obviously is a fairly popular sport, there's been a pretty interesting evolution. Initially, years ago, it was the media that decided who was the national champion. In fact, they did that before the bowl games, and then moved to the BCS, which pitted number 1 versus number 2, which I think worked fairly well as a first step. Development in college sports is evolutionary, not revolutionary. It's usually incremental. And now there's the CFP, the College Football Playoff, with 4 teams. The 10 Division I conference commissioners put that playoff together. It's not run by the NCAA. It's run by the College Football LLC. And I think they gave considerable thought because the universe obviously is bigger. Theoretically, there's 120-some teams, Division I football teams, that are eligible for that playoff. So, and there needs to be access. Access is a very important word when colleges talk about the playoffs, because you want to make sure that a kid has an opportunity with his team or her team to make it into a playoff. So I think they've designed a pretty good system. There's lots of calls for expanding that to 6 or 8 perhaps, or maybe even more. Obviously the old Division I AA and Divisions 2 and 3 do have real college playoffs in terms of additional teams. College is unique. I'm not sure how many lessons we can really draw, for the other professional leagues. We have to take other factors into consideration, class time, certainly with sports like football, where the end of the season coincides with the end of the semester. There's final grades that are going on. I don't know if you all think about this that much on the professional side. We have to consider money a little bit. We don't want to send a team all the way across the country to play in a playoff game. We'd rather try to keep that school somewhat closer to its home. You probably don't have that concern on the professional side. So in terms of the data points that were important for the CFP, there still is human discretion, right? It's a group of, I think, 12 or 13 that decide the top 4 and rank the top 25. The most important factors really are head-to-head competition, winning your conference, right? So there's a benefit, obviously, to regular season play. And that's irregardless of whether you have a conference championship game or you don't. Take the Big 12, for example. Their conference champ ought to be given that same sort of bonus for winning a conference championship as the Big 10 champ would, who had played in the playoff game. And strength of schedule. So those are really the factors that have been delineated by the playoff committee. And within that, any one of the members is able to use any information that he or she really feels is relevant. We have, like everybody does, a boatload of statistics, breakdowns, you name it. I think over the first 2 years of the CFP, I was on it the first year, we got somewhat fortunate. Ohio State came out of nowhere and was really playing extraordinarily well at the end of the season and ended up winning the national championship. And last year, it seemed to be a relatively non-controversial choice of the 4 teams that eventually went into the playoffs, of course, with Alabama and Clemson playing a pretty good, well-played game, close game, with Alabama winning.
Okay. Just to throw it open to you guys, should we be looking for ways to make the regular season more meaningful? If the playoffs are, if they're this sort of small sample size, is there a way, or is it important to make the regular season more meaningful? I know MLS, for instance, has a supporter shield. NHL has a President's Cup. You have conference championships in college sports. But are those important enough, and is there any way that other sports can sort of follow and make the regular season kind of have a little more meaning?
Well, I think in those examples that you bring up, especially like the President's Trophy and the NHL, it's actually seen as kind of like a bad thing, or there's like a curse associated with it, and it becomes a symbol of like mockery. If your team doesn't go on to win the Stanley Cup, then like the fans of opposing teams can kind of hold that over you. So it's kind of something that you don't want, and that speaks to the playoff-centric kind of attitude that we all have in pro sports, is that it just, the playoffs are all that matter, and if you have the championship belt at the end of the season, then you're the champion, you're the best team, and there's not really a whole lot of room for a regular season. Like, good job, guys, but you just didn't get it done in the playoffs, but you still had a great year.
You know, I would argue that. I think for a lot of fans, they may not fully grasp it, but I think they don't want a perfected system that determines during regular season this is the best. Even when you talked about the number of iterations you'd have to play through to determine the absolute best team. You know, sports is the great unknown with content in our DVR age. That ability to watch something where you don't know what's going to happen. You're expecting the unexpected. So it's a tension I think every sport has to face and balance, because obviously with the regular season, you want that import, you want people to care and to engage and consume, but at the same time, you want to have that postseason that's going to lend to those special moments that really captivate the attention of your fan base and help drive that consumption and everything that drives your sport forward.
And one other thing, when we're talking about like the lengths of the regular season and like the amount of time that you need, I think the NBA is actually overly long, and that's an argument that's been made by people increasingly over the years, is that there are too many games and you have too much certainty after every NBA game of like, did the better team win? That's an example of where like they might need to scale it back to put it on the same scale as, 162 Major League games might be the equivalent of, I don't know, 30 NBA games or something like that.
Yeah, and when you think about, to your question, how do you make the regular season more meaningful? We try to think about it sort of in two ways, right? So, one way you make the regular season more meaningful is that your regular season performance has a significant impact in what happens to you in the postseason. And so the ability to get a bye or the ability to have home field advantage is obviously significant. And the players and the coaches and the teams are all thinking about that. Part of the challenge, I think, of any league is that if you have a long schedule, so in baseball's case, which is very long, and you're talking about how do you make it more meaningful to the fans, it's difficult to have one of 162 moments, right? I mean, how much meaning can you actually put into that? And so what you're constantly trying to do is balance the need for the importance on that evening, but really how do you explain it in a way so they understand the importance of that evening in the broader context? And in today's society, with social media and whatnot, it's not easy to get somebody in March or April to be thinking about, a Tuesday night game, what it's going to mean in the fall. And that's a very difficult thing that I think we're all wrestling with.
Before the CFP started, there was a lot of concern that the new playoff system, 4 teams, was going to somehow damage the regular season. That hasn't seemed to happen, certainly at least at the Power 5 level. The big schools, the regular season is still very important. And I would make the argument in college basketball, the NCAA tournament really shines a pretty bright light on the conference tournaments taking place, literally for the big conferences this past weekend, and also has helped the regular season. College basketball's challenge is the non-conference schedule that starts in November, mid-November or so, and that's really more so, I think, driven by the fact that football is getting into its crescendo. MLS is coming up with MLS Cup. There's lots of World Series is just probably finished, so that's a different challenge I think that college basketball has, which is the months of November, December, and even early January before the conference seasons start. That's a real challenge for the college basketball interest level.
So who does it right? Who do you think has the best playoff system?
European soccer.
Well, it's funny you said that, because did I tell you I was going to say that? Basically, European soccer, most leagues there, everybody plays everybody twice, and whoever has the best record wins. First of all, what do you guys? Is there any application to U.S. sports with that?
Well, the one thing about that is that it's balanced, right? Which we brought up earlier, and it's actually very, very difficult to build a balanced schedule. In the NFL, you can't do it because you don't play. There's not enough games, and in baseball, you really can't do it either because of the travel. I mean, it's almost impossible for you to go from West Coast to East Coast, back and forth, to make sure you play everyone equally. And so, by definition, when you're setting up a regular season, you're going to be making those trade-offs as to who you're going to play more versus less, and then that in turn creates what is perceived to be some inequity from team to team. And so I think that's what ultimately leads you towards the playoff structure, is because you know that in the regular season there's going to be inequity, and you can't necessarily say a team that won 95 games in the National League is the same as a team that won 95 games in the American League. And so you have to build something into the playoff format that takes that into account.
Right. And another thing I would say that makes it a little different is that most international or most European leagues have, at the same time they're playing the regular season, they're also playing a cup, which is basically a year-long playoff system. And both of those titles carry a lot of meaning. So you're sort of getting the best of both worlds, and it would be, I think, pretty hard to.
I was going to say they do. I mean, in a lot of ways, Europe suffers from the same issues that we do, which is, who is the best team? And they actually do have playoffs. It's the Champions League. So, Man City or Liverpool or Arsenal can claim to be the winners of the EPL at the end of the season, but they can't claim they're the best team in Europe. And so what you have actually across the European leagues is, you're right, you have your domestic league competition that crowns the champion of your league, but it still leaves the open question as to who's the best team in Europe. And so they actually have a format which is not dissimilar to the playoff system we have in the U.S., where they aggregate the best teams from across the league in an effort to crown the champion.
Well, back to the original question then. So who does it best? Neil?
I think the NFL does it best, truth be told, because each individual football game kind of carries and conveys the same information as like each individual basketball game in terms of knowing that the best team won. But instead of, like, the NBA's playoffs are, I think we all agree, like, incredibly long. And they're great if you were thinking about running like a scientific experiment to determine who the best team is. The best team wins the NBA a lot more often than any of the other sports. But at the same time, that level of certainty, I think, sometimes robs, especially like in the early rounds where you have really lopsided first-round matchups, it does kind of rob things of excitement. And so the NFL's answer is to kind of go the opposite way and have the single elimination tournament. And aside from the occasional hiccup where Joe Flacco just goes crazy and the Ravens rattle off wins and various other cases like that, the NFL champion does tend to be like a credible champion, while, like you had mentioned earlier, being part of the conversation of potential best teams, while also not having like just the level of certainty where the Warriors or Spurs are just going to steamroll through the Western Conference this year, and there's not really a whole lot that other teams can do about it, barring some kind of injury. So yeah, I think the NFL kind of balances things the best.
Any other opinions? You can vote for yourself if you want.
I mean, I think college basketball is an interesting format because it's, everybody's in and you have to win your way through. Now, sometimes that leads to some anomalous results where, a team who's a low seed makes it to the Final Four because they got lucky on their draw or they won a couple of games. But, at least I think there's an equity there. I mean, I think there is equity there in the sense that everybody starts from the same place in the tournament. You do seed them, so you kind of eliminate some of those odd results. And then it's just, win the result on the floor. Whoever the best team is at the end wins. And so a lot of sports, we could never do that. Baseball could never do that. A lot of other sports could never do that with the way those sports are designed. But I mean, the point you made about the NBA, it's sort of the NFL, applying the NFL model to basketball.
Right.
And so it's kind of the best of both worlds.
Talking about analytics and data, it doesn't come up a ton, but one place it really, I think, applies is with what NASCAR has done, because you guys basically revamped the whole system and were in a position where you could create something new, and you had years and years and years of data to look at. So how much modeling did you guys do when you were coming up with the chase, and how much do you continue to sort of look back and think about tweaking things?
Yeah, so real quick for the audience again, the way to understand how our playoffs have evolved over time. Again, we did the culmination of your points over the entire season, and that would crown your champion. You can understand how that led to some real anticlimactic moments at the end of the season, when pretty much for everyone else here is having their great moment of excitement, and they're guaranteed every year. So we evolved first to the chase, and our first iteration of that, a dozen plus years back, was to effectively have the first 26 races and then have a 10-race, basically mini-season. And that 10-race mini-season would also track, basically the points you would get during those 10 races. Again, what we found was while that would reward good racing and good behavior, it didn't lend itself to that great moment at the end. So yes, so when we looked at how we wanted to evolve our sport, we looked at an elimination format. Now this is challenging because again, it goes right to that balance and that tension between what's the best team out there and some of the uncertainty and the things you can't predict and go for. When you're racing, you're dealing with a whole litany of variables at place that, you know, one could go wrong and that takes you out from a championship. So for us, we ran a lot of analytics looking back over time. The challenge, of course, is that data is only good insofar as the context that that data was in. So, you know, when we moved our system, we moved to one where we accentuated winning. We now have an elimination format. We start out with 16 drivers. To get into the playoffs, you need to win, and that guarantees your spot in the playoffs. And then when you get to the playoffs, we do an elimination format. We have 4 rounds of that. If you win in your round, in a round, you advance automatically to the next round, and the others fall in based on their points. So we did a number of analytics looking back at how that would have changed seasons in the past. And so the challenge was what we wanted to do is we wanted to capture that moment that had fans tuning in. At the same time, you didn't want to have the fan base feel like we were making a mockery of the need to race hard all season long. I think why it's worked for us is what's very different about our sport from the other sports up here is, you know, you have 40 cars in the field and only one's going to win each week. So you're only going to have one in a winner's circle. And that is something that makes each race weekend special in its own right. And to win that race is a significant undertaking, a bit different than, say, if you've won a match, you've won a game on a team level. But yeah, we did. We had to run through a number of iterations of it, and there was a lot of debate internally about how to go about that. Final point is with the level of commercial spending that's in the sport and with our sponsors, we had an extra layer of diligence that we had to be very careful about. Because obviously you've got companies spending a lot of money to put their name on that car and to be associated with that race team. All the more that we had to be very careful that we were going about this the right way. And I'd like to say that, you know, a couple years into it, I think we feel pretty good about the result of it.
So Mark, there's one data point that we haven't really mentioned, which is hugely important, which is TV viewership.
Right. Yeah.
So none of us, college or pro, would even think about a playoff program or changing something without, you know, lots of discussion with our network partners on making sure that, you know, that's appropriate for television, can be monetized, et cetera. So that may be the most important metric, you know, for everyone up here.
That's probably right.
Yeah. So the system, as it, you obviously ran the numbers on past seasons to see how it worked. What about looking at the makeup of the chase itself? Because right now it basically comes down to how the top 4 drivers perform at one track. That's what decides the whole thing. So are you and have you been looking at the 10 tracks that make up the chase and especially Miami Homestead, which is the final race?
Right. So that's again a challenge with our sport. The playing surface is different as you go from track to track, obviously. Whereas other forms of sport, whether it's soccer, baseball, or football, you're going to have a consistency with the landscape. So our challenge is we have these big facilities, and weather matters. It matters greatly in racing. And so, there's certain times of year that you want to be racing in certain environments. And then, with all the sports that are lined up here, we're in a crowded marketplace. So we have to be also very careful about how we're placing where we are and how we are as we put our races forward. So it has been one of the critiques, and it's been a not insignificant one, which is obviously you're going to have some race teams that are going to do far better at smaller racetracks than they will at larger racetracks. And right now, we've got it, as you noted, our championship ends in Miami. I think we're pretty pleased with how it's played out, but that is something we're going to have to look at over time, to see whether or not it makes sense to rotate where our races are at, and particularly when you look at some of the cutoff races that determine whether or not you advance to that next round.
Okay. There are certainly instances where the playoff structure is going to have an impact on a regular season. I'm thinking like the Spurs and the DNP old and things like that. Is that, and in NASCAR, the points racing, which we used to see where guys would be rewarded for, you know, maybe finishing third as opposed to taking the extra effort to win. Is that a bad thing necessarily, you think?
Certainly, like instances where the NBA, maybe like a decade ago, they had situations where like you didn't want to be the 4 seed or something. Like you wanted to actually kind of engineer a lower seed, like a 5 seed or a 6 seed, because of the way that they had set it up so that they rewarded division champions. And so it's sort of an unexpected consequence of that structure at the top of the conference rankings ended up playing into, oh, well, there's like a really weak division champion, so we want to play them in the first round. And I think they would even get home court. Like you could be the 6 seed and have home court against the 3 seed, even though the 3 seed was the division champ. And they've closed that loophole, but it's a great example of how teams are really smart, and they ferret out these opportunities to have, you know, exploit the sort of perverse incentives. And all of what we're talking about is about setting incentives for teams, I think, and trying to figure out what's the best way to kind of get them to respond, and do you, you know, what's the emphasis that you put on regular season versus the playoffs, and do you want to emphasize, like, if it's possible to have a DNP old, you know, do you want to penalize that? Certainly when people watch the Spurs, they want to see Tim Duncan, they want to see Manu Ginobili, they don't want to see backups. And yeah, it's all about kind of minimizing the perverse incentives, I think.
Yeah, I think in baseball, it creates a situation where I think the trade deadline is really important, you know, because you're essentially starting to convert from this team that's designed to go through 162 and to make it through that grind to a team that says, all right, it looks like I'm going to be able to qualify for the playoffs. How do I set my team up in a way that makes me most successful in that format? And so you see a lot of, I think we have probably one of the more active trade deadlines in sports, because I think you see teams starting to retool their roster and say, all right, you know, I need a bullpen, I need an extra pitcher, I need some of these things that I might need in a playoffs format if I were to make it that would make me successful. And so I think that's exciting for fans. I think fans like that. It rewards the fan who follows his team, who can say, hey, I think we're in it. If we can make it to August, then we can make some moves at the trade deadline and make this thing happen. And so I think that's a cool thing about the way our format is set up.
Yeah, I mentioned we picked the Indians to win, and one of the reasons was they had a real solid 1, 2, 3 in their rotation. And, you know, is it a problem or a bad thing necessarily that you play 162 games with a 5-man rotation, then you get to the playoffs and you're probably going to use 3 guys. So these 2 pitchers who've started 40% of your games basically go away or in radically different roles. Is that something that you think is problematic or could be mitigated somehow or should be?
Well, I mean, there's a 5-man rotation, but the reality is over the course of a season, most teams probably have 8 or 9 starting pitchers, just with the way pitching works. So I think it actually works in a way that sort of levels the playing field, right? It allows the teams that, you know, you don't get this benefit for stockpiling this huge roster of guys in the minor leagues or guys that are kind of second-tier players. It really allows you to focus on who's the best, who are your best pitchers. And if you can come to the table with, you know, 3 or 4 really good pitchers, and then fill out your bullpen, which we saw the Royals did this last year. That, you know, they've been really successful with their bullpen. It gives you sort of a blueprint of a team that can be successful, and I think that's fine. You know, I think, you know, we're never going to, like I said, we're never going to have a 1,000-game regular season, and we're never going to have, you know, 10 rounds in the playoffs. So you have to make those trade-offs, and I think it works.
Okay, we're coming up on a few minutes left before we get to questions, so I just wanted to kind of end with the sort of obvious question. We're at an analytics conference, and the fact that there are so many people here shows that you know, there's this great collection of data out there, and you know, it can be used for so many great things. It can help us win bar arguments. It can help teams build better rosters. It can help players figure out what they need to work on. It lets us compare players across generations. But is there a way to use all of this stuff at our fingertips to improve the competition? Can we do that? How do we do that?
I'll start out. You know, it's something we've put a lot of time and energy into at NASCAR now, as we're pulling more and more data from the vehicle, and as technology is allowing us to make sense of that data and to begin to push that out for consumption with our fan base. It's right now our racing operations group is hard at work now trying to stay ahead of the curve of, you know, as expectations from fans across all our sports change in terms of what they want, how they want to interact, how they want to consume their sport. With us at NASCAR, it's no different. And so as we look at formats of racing and also how and where we can get the best parity. I mean, I think that is something that's important as well for every form of sport. It's easy to look and focus on how you're going to have a playoff system that's going to yield the very best team. But, going back to the point Oliver made about with eyeballs and television and how much that matters. Having fans out there that, I was talking to Todd about Orlando City. I mean, having a fan base that can really be energized about wanting to follow that team and believe that this changes or the other, well, my team could be a champion. With NASCAR, it's no different. And yeah, the data is more important than ever before as we're trying to figure out what yields the best racing and what's going to give us our best chance of competing on the larger global marketplace with other forms of sport.
In terms of college football, I think the best change to come out of this new system is the upgrading of scheduling that colleges are doing in their non-conference play, right? So that's always been a weak point, I think, in our business. We've got college football has great Octobers and Novembers and sometimes not so great Septembers because there's lots of one-sided non-conference games going on. So that's helped, right? And that's helped because the committee, which is able to use all this data, but it's fairly simple to see your strength of schedule. You don't have to, be an MIT graduate to get that. So I think that's really helped our game and will continue to help our game as teams upgrade their non-conference schedule. It's much more attractive television-wise, and one of the reasons I think we're all doing that is because of the pressure that TV put on us. But I think it's also good for the quality of the game and for the fan experience to see a good non-conference matchup as opposed to a one-sided 65-7 game. Nobody wants to see that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. The analytics are incredibly helpful. They're obviously helpful in terms of just your roster management over the course of the season, and we use that a tremendous amount just in terms of the playoffs. How you managing injuries and whatnot, and workloads and strains and whatnot with regards to players. But as a sort of predictive in terms of who the best team is, I guess I'm a bit of a purist. I mean, that's why we play the game. I always kind of chuckle when I watch these simulations and they've run these two teams play each other on this computer model and they've sort of shown who the best team is. Well, I guess we can all go home and not go watch the game. From my standpoint, that's the beauty of sports. So why you play it is because you don't know. There are so many variables out there that are happening at any moment, and the beauty of it is you want to watch these elite athletes or elite drivers, at these great moments perform, and you don't know what's going to happen until you're watching it unfold.
I guess the one thing to that point, you talked about the small sample size in the playoffs. That actually creates these heroic performances, right? Because you have, like Daniel Murphy last year in the playoffs, had just an incredible run. And that's just because it was a small sample, it was a small period of time and he got hot. And those are things that fans love and that end up being legendary performances that happen across all those sports. And if you just simply played one regular season, as many games as you could, and then crowned the champion at the end, what would happen to all those great moments that people can really hang on to?
True. Well, that takes us to our audience question portion of the proceedings, which I have right here. I think it was a nice discussion, and we got a few more good questions here. Number one, for Neil, and anyone else can jump in. Are we too playoff-centric? If Golden State gets 73 wins, is that not a greater accomplishment than just one title?
I personally think that is an incredible accomplishment, especially if you think about like the quality of the league today versus even like past eras. And I fear that if they do lose, and even if they go to the finals and they lose in 7 games, that it will somehow be diminished. And it goes back to kind of what we were talking about earlier with these regular season accomplishments, is that they just serve to kind of build pressure for and raise the bar that you have to clear in the playoffs. And I think that does tend to diminish great regular seasons. And it's kind of the trade-off that we make when we decide to have the playoffs structured the way they are.
Okay, what are your thoughts on the MLB wildcard game? Win or go home has sent away many good teams like the 97-win Pirates. I mean, you addressed this a little bit before. It basically gives you an incentive not to be a wildcard team.
Yeah, I mean, I think the theory is that you play a lot of games against teams in your division. So if you were the best team, you should have won against the other teams in your division and had that best record. And so I think the old format that we had, the wild card just got thrown in like every other division winner, and we saw a lot of circumstances where that team would then move on through the playoffs because they happened to be playing well at that time, and so it didn't provide enough of an incentive for the team that actually built the best roster, got through the gauntlet of the regular season. It didn't give that team enough incentive. I think now, one game might be harsh. Might it be better to have 3? But then you start asking the question of, if you have 3, are you then providing a disincentive to the teams that win because they have to sit and wait so long for those other teams to play those 3 games? And now you're in a situation where you did win your division, you did win all those head-to-head competitions, and you're sitting for 7, 8, 9 days waiting for the other teams to get ready for you. And you lose your edge, and you might end up losing that series. So, I think we're probably in the right place unless we were to really radically, transform the way that the playoffs look. I just think the way the baseball system and season works, you can't really do what the NFL does, where you have like a bye round, where you have this, full round of playoffs with a bunch of teams waiting for winners.
I'll say that one of the weirder things that I've seen, like in series-based playoffs. Somebody proposed years ago that you can actually, instead of or in addition to home advantage, you can mess around with what if you spotted a team a 1-0 lead to start the series, if it kind of brings it more into the ratio of how much do you want to reward a team for doing well in the regular season versus giving a chance to some underdog in the playoffs. So, I mean, there are creative solutions out there too, but I don't know at what point you kind of reach the decision to pull the trigger on that as a league and actually do it.
Well, and I think, again, it's interesting. You could argue, take like Golden State. So let's say they win 73, 74 games. Aside from if you're a Golden State Warriors fan, my guess would be if you reached out to most NBA fans and you said, look what they've done, yes, great team. So would you like to see them sweep their way through the playoffs? No. People will say that. They don't. And actually, when you get to the finals, you'll find a fair amount of diehard NBA fans that will be actually rooting for an upset. And so you have to square that with the notion that there's some perfection that we want. This is the entertainment. This is what people want. They want those moments. They want that excitement.
I knew promotion relegation would come up at some point, but this is actually an awesome idea, and the answer is very obvious. Has the NCAA ever considered a promotion relegation model to give non-Power 5 FCS teams something to play for? I mean, I'm guessing the answer is no, but it would be awesome, man. It's like
that's a great
Notre Dame's in the OVC now, or the MAC.
We'll do it when MLS does it.
Thank you. We'll do it when you do it.
There we go.
As a Minnesota Gophers fan, I object.
Well, actually, I went to Vanderbilt, and when I was there, it was constantly every November, the local columnist would start the whole, Vanderbilt needs to be in the MAC argument, and not anymore though. Could more U.S. sports move to a UEFA Champions League style playoff where each round features both a home and away match? That's an interesting one. I mean, I'm guessing the way it works there is you play 2 games home and away, and it's a total points thing. It'd be kind of turning sports on its head if all of a sudden the World Series was 63 innings total score, or so I'm guessing the answer is probably no most of the ways there.
That might work better for lower scoring sports. I think that might be one of the reasons it works in soccer is, especially like if it's like road goals, or in the case of baseball, it would be like road runs or something. But I can't imagine in basketball, like trying to, if you blow out a team by 30 and then realizing you have to win by more than 30 in the next game to kind of offset it. Yeah.
Here's what we sort of talked about. Thoughts on shortening the MLB regular season and increasing the number of playoff games to slightly reduce the randomness in the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to figure out how to ramp up the playoff format from, I guess, basically a division, an LCS, and a World Series to add another round to it, which again would take a lot of time. I mean, I don't know. We haven't really looked into that. I mean, I think there's this a real historical presence of this 162 and a lot of the records and a lot of the things that go along with that, for bad or good, I think we derive a lot of value from that, because of the way that the season's structured and how long it is. You'd probably have to go to like 140 or something like that, or 150 to make that work, and that's a pretty big change.
Right. And again, money. I mean, obviously, you would presumably be making more money off the postseason, but I don't think every team would be excited to have 22 games cut off its schedule.
Yeah, I mean, you would lose. I mean, there's one of the great things about baseball is that you get to have that fan connection, and you get to have people come to your ballpark. It's affordable, and there's a lot of opportunities for people to come to games. And so if you chop off 10 of those opportunities for a club who spend a lot of money to invest in a ballpark or whatever, you start to ask the question of like, what are you really getting out of that? You're adding a couple playoff games for what purpose? To take away a lot of that fan engagement, a lot of those opportunities for fans to come out to the ballpark and experience your sport. It's tough, and that's, I think, it's the same thing with NASCAR, the same with all these sports. I mean, we have a regular season, and to start talking about, do you want to dial it back to add to the postseason? It's a tough conversation to have.
Okay, another good question here for playoff analytics would be, does each league feel like it has the optimal number of teams in the playoffs? Guessing I know the answer, but...
Yeah, we do.
You figured it out.
And if you don't, why not?
If anybody has any questions, just feel free to call me, and I'll give you our analytics and how we answered that. We did, but we also set it because we know we're going to be expanding over the next couple of years. So we wanted to set a number that we could sort of grow into, and clearly the number of teams that make the playoffs is the age-old debate, and you're always trying to find that number. What you don't want to do, you want to find a number, at least in our view, that rewards the regular season, but that also the teams that are getting in towards the end are actually good enough to actually win the championship. It doesn't do a whole lot of good if you have teams that make the playoffs that never win. And it's interesting, you talk about what happened with Golden State and the great run that they've had, and I was thinking back to the early days when the Lakers had their great run in the late 80s, and all the Celtics fans said, well, not so fast, I'm not sure you guys are the best team. And I think a big part of those types of situations that happen, and you talked about the NFL being a great playoff system, I think a big part of it is how much parity there actually is in the league. So if you have a league where there's not a big disparity as among the talent on the teams, then I don't think you have the same sort of emotional reaction in the playoffs when somebody loses as you do if you're in a different sort of format where there clearly seems to be a big disparity and there's sort of an upset. That happens a lot more in the NCAA tournament, for example, where you have the Davids and the Goliaths. But for us, we went back and actually tried to do some analytics, and on the basis of does the higher seed always win? And it was difficult for us to find any correlation between seeding, where you were seeded in the playoffs, and playoff success. And that sort of led us to question, well, maybe it's because in reality there really isn't that big of a difference between the 1 seed and the 5 seed. It's not that there's something wrong with the playoff structure or something wrong with who qualifies, but in reality you have a very bunched group of teams that are participating.
This is basically a question you just answered, but I'll throw it to anyone else. How much of an advantage actually comes from a first-round bye? Have you guys looked at that? And if not, Neil, you're a journalist. You should know this. You've clearly written about it at some point.
I mean, it's a big advantage, though, if you think about like one fewer opponent that you have to go through. Like if every series or if it's a single elimination every game is a coin flip or close to it, especially if you've set up the playoff system so that all the teams are relatively evenly matched, it can drastically increase your chance of winning the championship just to take away one of those sort of 50-50 flips that you could lose.
Yeah, I mean, in baseball, your pitching is such an important part of your chances in the playoffs. We had, the year that I think 2011, the Phillies were by far the best team in the NL during the regular season, and the Cardinals ended up beating them in that they were the wild card and beat them in that 5-game series because Carpenter was able to throw twice. And so in the new playoff format that we have, where there's the wild card round, Carpenter would have had to throw in that wild card game, and he wouldn't have been available twice against the Phillies. And so baseball is unique in the sense that one player, in basketball sort of has the one-player phenomenon, but baseball with the positional pitcher, being able to reuse that player in a series, it really hurts you to go into that wild card. It doesn't mean that you can't do it. We've had a team already come from the wild card and win the World Series, but it means you got to earn it. And so that's what I think the format that we like is, you give an advantage. It gives you an advantage to actually win your division and skip that bye round, but you can still, if you have the right chemistry and formula, you can still get through. There's still a pathway for you if you are the best team coming from that wild card round.
All right, this has been sort of a recurring theme, but should the focus be the success of the best team or the success of the league as a whole entertainment product? So what's your ultimate goal? Running the best competition or making the fans happy?
I think that's the balance that we're all charged with. You want to say competition. You want that to rule out at the end of the day. But as we've all discussed, you know, the interplay with sponsors, with television, with the fan and the fan consumption, you want to have some of that tension in play. So, you know, you're trying to find the right balance between both.
Yeah, I mean, we don't think they're mutually exclusive. In fact, you know, for us, it's building the right competition structure is actually the first and most important aspect, and we believe if we do that, then the fans will come. You know, if you look at least the great historic properties in the U.S., whether it's the NCAA tournament or college bowl games, you know, they've been around long before, you know, the influx of the massive television revenue. So, you know, from our standpoint, it's really about putting the best competition. And as I said, you know, earlier on in the day, it is when you don't have a balanced schedule, you know, once you have that starting point, then your entire conversation is about what's the best way to crown the champion on the back end of that. And, you know, it's an ongoing process. You look at it every single year. Should we have more teams? Should we have fewer teams? Should we play a series? Should we not play a series? And then hopefully over time it sort of, you know, lands someplace where I think everybody feels pretty good about it.
I think that's a pretty good one to end on. So what if we decided we got the right number of teams and everything's good?
Everybody likes their format.
Worthy champions.
Worthy champions. I appreciate it, guys.
Thank you.
Good talk.
Thank you all.